At my age, I never thought love could still break me. I was 65 when Richard came into my life, or rather, back into it. We had known each other in our youth, when we both lived 2 bus stops from the same church on the east side of town. Life had taken us in different directions, marriages, jobs, children, losses, until one day, decades later, we crossed paths in the grocery store. He said he remembered the way I used to wear my hair wrapped in a silk scarf on Sundays. I said I remembered how he could make a whole room laugh without raising his voice. We laughed again that day, and then a week later over coffee, and then a month later over dinner with my grandbabies crawling around under the table. It was the kind of peace I had given up hoping for. After my daughter passed, after the long nights in hospitals, the silence of an empty house, the weight of raising 2 little ones when my heart was still raw, I thought the rest of my life would be spent alone. I had learned how to carry loneliness with grace, how to tuck grief into the quiet corners of my days. But Richard brought sound back into the house. Not noise, not chaos, but warmth. His laugh in the kitchen, the way he hummed while washing dishes, the comfort of someone else falling asleep beside you. My grandchildren adored him. He brought them books, listened to their long stories, called them little lights, like they were the only thing keeping the world spinning. For a while, I let myself believe it was real, that I was allowed this, a second chance. A man who understood family, who seemed to know that love at our age wasn't about sparks or promises, but about showing up every day. Still, even in peace, there were shadows. I noticed he'd pull away when the phone rang, that his stories didn't always line up. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just scared of being happy. But happiness should never feel like something you have to explain away. And yet, I kept smiling, kept cooking dinner, kept laughing at his jokes. Because when you've built your life around keeping things from falling apart, silence can become a kind of survival. I didn't know then that silence would also become my greatest power. There's a particular kind of joy that comes late in life, not loud or rushing, but steady, earned and soft around the edges. That's what I found with Richard, or what I thought I found. We started slow, careful. He was charming in the way older men often are, not showy, just present. He remembered small things I said in passing, like the way I liked my tea, or that my knees ached when the weather changed. He didn't try to impress me. He just showed up, every Thursday to help with groceries, every Sunday after church, every evening phone call to ask how my day had gone. And in that gentle rhythm, I found something that felt like safety. My grandchildren, Jordan and Maya, were the first to love him. Children know things. They know when someone's spirit is kind, when someone listens for real. Richard made them feel seen. He read them bedtime stories and let them win at dominoes. He taught Jordan how to shuffle cards and told Maya her name sounded like music. For a time, it felt like we were a family. Our dinners were simple: rice and peas, baked chicken, greens when I had the strength to wash and chop them. We didn't have much, but the table was full. Laughter came easily. Evenings spilled into card games and stories from Richard's childhood in Savannah, and the house felt like it had life again. I had been afraid that love wouldn't feel right at my age, that it would feel foolish or out of place. But it didn't. It felt quiet and true. I let myself believe that maybe this was the reward for all the years I'd carried things alone. But even in the warmth, I felt something shift. It started small. Richard's phone would ring during dinner and he'd step outside to answer. He said it was work, old colleagues needing advice, church business, something about a community project he helped run on the west side. I wanted to believe him, and mostly I did. But I noticed things. He started wearing cologne he hadn't used before. Sharper, younger. He'd come over later in the evenings, and sometimes not at all. When I asked, he always had a reason: traffic, errands, helping someone from church. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, wasn't I the one who always said not every question needs an answer? I've lived long enough to know that digging for trouble can sometimes make you find it. Still, there were nights I stayed awake longer than I admitted, waiting to hear the car pull up, listening for a call that didn't come. One night after dinner, while washing dishes, Maya asked, "Grandma, why does Mr. Richard always look at his phone when we're talking?" I told her he was just busy. But her question stayed with me. Children don't ask unless they've been watching. Later that week, I saw him across the street from the school, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. Young, tall, pretty in the way some women are without trying. They stood too close. When I asked him about it that night, he smiled like nothing was wrong. "She's just helping with the youth program," he said, waving it off. "Don't go getting ideas." I laughed with him. I always did. But that night, while he slept beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. There was something cold between us now. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it, like a draft through a closed window. Love had come back into my life, but so had doubt. I didn't go looking for anything. That's the part I still say to myself, even now. There's a certain kind of dignity that comes with not asking too many questions. I was raised that way. You keep your house clean, your children safe, and your business to yourself. But dignity doesn't mean blindness, and silence doesn't always mean peace. Richard had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. He started wearing a different cologne. It was musky, newer, too sharp for someone his age. I noticed it the first time when he leaned in to kiss my cheek, and the scent clung to my sweater long after he'd left. He said someone gave it to him as a gift. One of the deacons from church, trying to keep me young. I smiled, but something inside me didn't. He became harder to reach. Not gone, just not present. His calls came later. His stories got shorter. He'd sit at the table nodding while the kids talked, but his eyes stayed on his phone. And when he did speak, it was with that smooth voice he always had, the one that could make anything sound fine. But I could feel the edge underneath. A man who wanted to be anywhere but where he was. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the bedroom while he showered. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, then again, then again. I didn't mean to look, but I did. Just one message was showing on the screen. A name I didn't recognize. A heart emoji next to it. Then the words, "Can't wait to see you again." That's all. I didn't open it. I didn't scroll. I just stood there, holding one of Jordan's tiny socks in my hand, like it would keep me from falling apart. My throat tightened, but my face didn't move. Not one twitch. I just set the sock down and walked out of the room like I'd forgotten something on the stove. That night, he sat across from me eating dinner like nothing had changed, and maybe for him, nothing had. He talked about the youth event at the church, about how the kids were getting harder to reach these days. I nodded. I asked the right questions. I laughed when I was supposed to. But something had shifted, not just in him, in me. Maya asked me later, "Grandma, why do you smile so much when you're sad?" I didn't answer her. I just kissed her forehead and told her to brush her teeth. She didn't ask again, but I could tell she noticed. Children always do. The next morning, I watched Richard from the window as he walked to his car. He stood in the driveway longer than usual, texting. Then he got in and drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. That's not who I am. I just stood there, holding my cup of tea, and let the quiet fill the space where trust used to be. I started to see more, now that I wasn't trying to protect myself from the truth. He was always just a little too defensive when I asked simple things, always just a little too vague, always a new story, a new errand, a new reason for coming late or not coming at all. But I stayed silent, because once you see the truth, you don't need to say it out loud, not right away. Sometimes silence is the only power you have left. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come with a funeral. It sits quiet in your chest, making room for itself slowly, like water rising in a well. You don't scream, you don't fall apart. You keep making dinner, folding clothes, answering the phone with a voice that sounds like yours even when it isn't. I told no one. Not my sister in D.C., not my church ladies, and especially not Miss Lorna, the neighbor who's known me since before my daughter was born. Some things you keep to yourself, not because you're hiding, but because saying it out loud would make it too real. The message stayed in my mind like a splinter. I hadn't seen any others, hadn't touched his phone again. I didn't need to. That one line was enough. Can't wait to see you again. I wondered how long it had been going on, if it started before the Sunday dinners, before the bedtime stories, before the way my grandbabies had started calling him Pop Pop like it meant something. But I didn't ask. I watched him. I listened to how his voice changed when he talked about the program or the mentorship group. I started noticing which days he wore cologne and which days he didn't, how he smiled less in my direction and more at his phone. Some nights, after the children were asleep, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and just listen to the house breathing, the creak of the floorboards, the tick of the kitchen clock. I would cry, not loud, not desperate, just quiet tears I could wipe away before morning. There's a particular shame that comes with being a woman of a certain age and being fooled. People assume you know better, that after a lifetime of heartbreak, you've learned how to spot a liar, how to guard your heart. But love doesn't work like that. Not even at 65, especially not at 65. Love still blinds you, still softens your spine, still makes you hope when you know better. One Saturday afternoon, Miss Lorna stopped by with some cornbread and greens from her pot. She always brought something when she had too much, and I'd always do the same. It was our way. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping sweet tea like she had nowhere else to be. "You look tired," she said gently. I smiled. Just one of those weeks. She didn't press. That's the thing about real friends. They don't need answers. They just know when you've stopped speaking the truth. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. "I saw Richard the other day," she said casually. "Didn't know he had a niece in town." I looked up. "A niece?" She shrugged. "Young woman. Pretty. They were walking by the lake. Maybe she was visiting." She said it without judgment, without leaning in too close, just offering me the kind of truth that gives you a choice. I thanked her for the greens, told her I'd return the Tupperware next week, and when she left, I stood at the sink and let the hot water run over my hands until I couldn't feel my fingertips. I didn't cry that night. I didn't need to. Some betrayals don't need fresh tears. They just replay the old ones. The next day, I baked a peach cobbler for the children and helped Jordan with his school project. I smiled, I laughed. I sat beside Richard on the couch while he watched TV and pretended not to notice the messages lighting up his phone. But inside me, something was shifting. Pain wasn't making me weaker. It was sharpening me. I wasn't ready to speak, but I was starting to see everything clearly. I saw her on a Thursday. The children were at school, and I was walking back from the corner store, carrying a small bag of groceries, just bread, milk, and a few yams. The sun was high but not hot, the kind of early fall day that makes the air feel gold. I almost missed them at first. They were across the street near the cafe. Richard was standing with his back to me, his head tilted slightly down like he was listening carefully. The woman was laughing, too loud, too easy, and she touched his arm like she'd done it before, like it was natural, like it belonged to her. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, light brown skin, long box braids tied into a loose bun. She wore a soft pink dress that hugged her body like it had been made for her. Effortless, like women who've never had to raise anyone but themselves. I stopped walking, barely breathing. He didn't see me. She didn't see me. But I saw everything. The way he leaned in. The way her hand stayed just a little too long on his chest. The way they laughed like the world around them had disappeared. And I, standing there with a plastic grocery bag cutting into my wrist. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel fragile. I felt something sharper, like glass inside the chest. But behind it, underneath it, something stronger was starting to rise. They walked off together down the street, not holding hands but close enough. I didn't follow. I didn't rush home. I just stood there a moment longer, then crossed the street and walked the long way back. At home, I put the groceries away one item at a time, careful not to slam a single cabinet. I didn't want the house to feel my mood. I didn't want the children to hear something in my footsteps. That evening, Richard came over like usual, kissed my cheek, complimented the stew, sat at the table and talked about a church meeting that ran long. I listened. I nodded. I passed the cornbread like I hadn't seen him lie in broad daylight. Later, after the kids were asleep, I asked him about his day, casually, like I hadn't already witnessed it. He told me he'd been with the youth director most of the afternoon, planning some kind of retreat. She's young but got a real heart for the kids, he said. The church needs more folks like her. I looked him right in the eye and smiled. You're right, I said. She sounds lovely. He smiled back, relieved, comfortable. That was the night I realized I didn't need to argue. I didn't need proof. The truth had a way of showing itself, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. I lay beside him in bed and listened to him sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if he ever looked at her the way he used to look at me. But I didn't cry. I had passed that point. Betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes it carves something open, and sometimes, when it does, you find out what you're really made of. I stopped asking him questions. No more, where were you? Or who was that on the phone? I already knew the answers, or at least the shape of them. And if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that when a man feels no pressure to lie, he'll start telling the truth without meaning to. So I gave him space. Not the kind you ask for, the kind you don't notice until it's already grown wide between you. I still cooked dinner, still kept the house clean, still listened to the children's stories and packed their lunchboxes with care. But something in me had gone quiet, not broken, just quiet. Jordan asked me one evening, why doesn't Mr. Richard read to us anymore? I told him he'd been busy, but even as I said it, I knew the truth. Richard had begun excusing himself early. He stopped staying the night, said he was tired, said he had meetings, always something. He kissed my cheek like I was someone he used to love and still felt obligated to be kind to. The children noticed. Children always do, but they never said much. Instead, they clung to me a little tighter, laughed harder at my jokes, laid their heads on my lap during movie nights and fell asleep in my arms like they were reminding me, we're still here. They didn't know it, but they saved me. One night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had gone still, I sat at the edge of my bed and let the tears come. Not weeping, not sobbing, just slow, steady tears. Like something inside me was being cleaned out. It wasn't just about Richard. It was about everything. About all the years I held people up when no one held me. About losing my daughter and not having time to fall apart because 2 children needed breakfast and clean clothes and someone to pretend they weren't hurting. About the silence that followed me through every room of this house until he walked in and made me believe it might finally be over. I wept for the woman I had been, the one who believed that love, late in life, meant safety. But when the tears stopped, I didn't feel weak. I felt clear. I got up, washed my face, and changed the sheets. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because anything was fixed, but because something in me had stopped pretending. The next morning I watched Richard stir his coffee at the table like he hadn't cracked something in me wide open. He asked how I slept. I told him, fine. He told me he might be late that evening. I told him, take your time. He kissed my forehead and walked out the door, and I didn't feel angry. I felt prepared. Later that day, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, not to check my clothes, not to fix my hair, just to see myself, really see myself. There was something in my eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Not grief, not fear, control. I had been waiting for a confrontation, thinking it would come like a storm. But maybe storms don't always roar. Maybe some arrive on tiptoe, and some women win by staying calm long enough to let the truth bury itself. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let silence do what it does best, expose everything. I had learned by now, silence is not surrender, it's strategy. Richard didn't notice the shift in me, not really. He still smiled when he walked through the door, still asked what was for dinner, still spoke to the children with that warm voice, like he hadn't already poured cold water into the trust we'd built. But I noticed him. Every detail, every slight hesitation when he mentioned his day, every glance at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, every new excuse that sounded just like the one before it, polished and practiced, but paper thin. He thought I was still unsure. That was his first mistake. There's something about being underestimated that sharpens a woman. You start to see what's been in front of you the whole time. The calls he took in the other room, the texts he answered with his back turned, the way he always changed the subject when the name Alicia came up, casually, like she didn't matter, like she wasn't slowly pulling him further away from the life we'd built. Alicia. That was her name. I learned it from a voicemail he forgot to delete. Her voice was smooth, confident, not apologetic. She called him baby, said she missed him, said she couldn't wait for next time. And there it was. I didn't cry. I didn't slam anything. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there, letting the sound of her voice settle into the room like dust, quiet, ordinary, and suffocating. Later that week, he brought flowers. Just because, he said, kissing the side of my cheek. I thanked him, placed the flowers in a vase, smiled. He didn't know I'd already emptied the drawer where he kept his toothbrush. He didn't notice I'd started locking the drawer where I kept the important papers. The ones with my name on the mortgage, the ones with my daughter's will, the ones that didn't have his name on them. Not now, not ever. I watched him closely. Not like a woman waiting for answers, but like a woman who already has them and is simply waiting to see what a liar does when no one stops him. The children were the only reason I hadn't already told him to leave. Their love for him was real, and I wasn't ready to tear the floor out from under them. Not until I could do it on my terms, with dignity. That's what this was now. Not heartbreak, not rage, control. Each evening I cooked less food, gave shorter answers, took longer walks, said I'm tired when he asked if I wanted to sit with him. Let the silence grow tall between us, and in that silence I could feel him start to squirm. He began over-explaining things, calling more often, buying small gifts, a scarf, a bottle of wine, a book I'd mentioned months ago. He was trying to fix something, but he didn't know what. Because I had stopped giving him anything to fix. I had stopped making him comfortable in the lie, and it was working. He became jumpy, defensive, and more careless. That's how I found the photo. It was in the back of his car, tucked between receipts and candy wrappers in the center console. A printed photo. Him and Alicia, standing in front of a mural downtown, his arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them smiling like they had nothing in the world to hide. I slipped the photo into my coat pocket and didn't say a word. That night I served dinner like usual. He told the children a story from his childhood, some tale about fishing with his grandfather. They laughed, I smiled, and I watched him. He didn't know it yet, but the war was already over. He had just mistaken my silence for weakness, but silence can be a slow, deliberate kind of strength, the kind that lets the truth speak for itself. There was no shouting, no suitcase at the door, no thrown plates or slammed doors. That's not the kind of woman I am. And truth be told, that kind of noise would have given him something to hold on to, some way to spin the story, paint himself as the victim or worse, make me feel like I'd lost control. But I hadn't. Not for a while now. He just didn't know it. The photo stayed tucked in the back of my Bible, between Psalms and Proverbs, where I used to keep my daughter's Sunday school drawings. I didn't need to look at it anymore. It wasn't there for proof. It was there to remind me. I saw what I saw. I knew what I knew. I didn't imagine the betrayal, and I didn't need to explain it to anyone. I'd stopped playing my part weeks ago. I no longer asked about his day. I no longer made excuses for his absences. I no longer let him into my quiet moments. But I still let him show up, still let him sit at my table, not because I couldn't live without him, but because I wanted him to feel what it meant to be watched instead of trusted. Guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It walks into rooms ahead of you. And lately, it had started showing up on Richard's face. He flinched when I looked at him too long, stumbled over his stories, laughed too loudly when the children said something funny. He was trying to hold it all together, but he didn't know I had already let go. I was waiting for the right moment, not for a confrontation. I didn't need that. What I needed was a setting where he could see himself clearly, through the eyes of others. A mirror. And that mirror came, as most things in our lives did, in the form of family. We were having a dinner, just a small one. My sister was in town, the children were excited, and Richard offered to grill. He wanted to be useful, he said. I told him he already was. That afternoon, I set the table with care. Real plates, cloth napkins, the good glasses I kept boxed in the back of the cabinet. Not because it was a special occasion, but because it was a turning point, even if no one else knew it yet. The children were laughing in the yard. My sister was sipping sweet tea on the porch. Richard moved between the grill and the table, trying to appear relaxed. But I could see it in his hands, the way they trembled just slightly when he passed me the serving tongs. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned to relationships. Someone mentioned trust, someone else brought up second chances, and that's when I spoke. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't say his name, I didn't even look at him. I just said, "Funny how some people lie so easily when they think you're too old, too soft, or too grateful to question them." The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable, just still. I kept cutting my food like I hadn't just opened a wound wide open. Richard froze. I didn't have to look at him to know his face had gone pale. My sister raised an eyebrow. The children were too young to understand, but everyone else knew. Something had been said. Something had shifted. I smiled and passed the cornbread. That was all. There was no argument, no denial, no scene. But after that night, Richard stopped calling as much, stopped stopping by, stopped trying to pretend. I had taken the one thing he never expected, the story, and I told it without telling it. He still doesn't know how much I saw, or how long I've known. But I think part of him suspects, because there's a kind of silence that can't be undone, a kind that follows a man, long after the door has closed behind him. It's a strange thing, how silence can make a room loud. The next family dinner came a few weeks later. My nephew was in town, and everyone agreed it was time for a little gathering. I said yes without hesitation. I had already cleared the space that once held Richard, his place at the table, his role in the stories, his imagined permanence. He was invited, of course. I made sure of that. I wanted him to come, and he did. He showed up on time, as if nothing had changed, wearing his usual smile. Holding a store-bought dessert like that would make up for everything he hadn't owned. He greeted the children with a warmth that used to feel real, kissed my cheek, barely, and called me darling, like he still believed he was welcome here. Alicia was with him. He didn't introduce her, just walked in with her close by, like she belonged. Like this was all fine. She wore red, bold, tight, and intentional. Her makeup was precise, her heels too high for a backyard dinner, and her smile too wide to be honest. She was beautiful and nervous. I could see it in the way her eyes scanned the room, unsure where to settle, in the way she clung to her glass, in the way she avoided looking directly at me. Good. The evening unfolded slowly, the way family dinners often do. Conversations wandered from childhood stories to work stress to who made the best macaroni. The children ran in and out, sticky-fingered and barefoot, full of laughter. I floated through the house with a grace no one questioned, setting dishes, clearing plates, watching everything. And slowly, I began to speak. Not much, not directly, just enough. A story here, a comment there. Some people will lie to your face and hold your hand while they do it. Funny how betrayal doesn't always feel like a slap. Sometimes it's just an empty chair, a missing laugh, a look that lingers too long on someone else. My sister caught my eye. My nephew raised his eyebrows. Alicia shifted in her seat. Richard said nothing. He was sweating by then. Not visibly, but I saw it. The tightness in his jaw, the way he refilled his drink too quickly, the way his eyes darted around the table as if someone might ask him a question he couldn't answer. No one did. I didn't need anyone to say anything. I had already taken my power back. This wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. By dessert, the tension had thickened. Not hostile, just heavy. Like a storm cloud waiting to break, though no one knew where the thunder would land. Richard stood to speak. Something about grateful for family and good to be together. But his voice was thin, his words hollow. Alicia smiled through it, but her eyes said everything else. I thanked him for the dessert, told her she looked so young, almost like one of the kids. Then I excused myself and went inside, leaving them at the table with their own discomfort. I didn't need to witness their unraveling. I had already seen the truth, and now, so had everyone else. It didn't happen with a plan. There was no script, no moment circled on a calendar. I just woke up that morning knowing I was done protecting everyone but myself. The house was full again. Another family dinner. Birthdays this time. 2 of the kids stacked in the same week. Balloons, candles, too much sugar, and a house full of love. Richard was there. Of course he was. Alicia was not. Maybe she'd seen enough at the last dinner. Maybe he told her not to come. Maybe she finally understood what kind of man he really was. I didn't care. He came alone. He brought a gift for Maya, a glittery craft kit, and handed it to her like nothing had shifted between us. She thanked him sweetly. Children are kind before the world teaches them to guard themselves. I moved through the kitchen with the same quiet grace I always had, setting out napkins, icing the cake, giving hugs and refilling cups. But something in me was solid now, settled. I wasn't pretending anymore, and I think he felt it. He kept watching me, like he was waiting for a signal, for softness, for mercy. But I had none left to give him. Not because I was bitter, but because I had nothing to apologize for. Dinner was loud as it should be. Laughter bouncing off walls, chairs scraping floors, hands reaching for seconds. I waited until the food was mostly gone, and the plates were still full of crumbs and conversation. Then I stood up, not with force, Not with a bang, just stood, and everything quieted. "I want to say something," I said, steady and calm. A few people looked up. Richard froze. "I want to thank you all," I continued, "for holding this family together, not just with birthdays and dinners, but with presence, with honesty." I let that word hang. Honesty. People shifted. I didn't rush. "Some of you know," I said softly, "that this past year has been complicated. I thought I'd found something solid again, a second chance at love, but what I found was a different kind of silence, one I had to carry alone for a while." Now they were all listening, really listening. I turned to the children who were sitting wide-eyed at the table. I smiled. "I want you to know," I said gently, "that love should never make you feel small, that the truth is never something to be afraid of, and that silence, when used right, can be the loudest voice in the room." I turned to Richard fully now, not angry, not sad, just finished. "I knew," I said. "For a long time I knew about the calls, the messages, the woman. I knew." He opened his mouth, but no words came. I didn't need them. "I didn't speak on it before," I continued, "because I wanted to hold this family together. But I realize now, it was never me who was breaking it." A long pause. The room was still. The children didn't understand all the details, but they understood something had shifted, and Richard, for the first time, looked truly small, not just guilty, diminished. I didn't wait for his apology. I didn't expect it. Apologies don't rebuild trust. They don't undo what was done in secret. I sat back down, took a sip of water, picked up my fork. Conversation resumed slowly, carefully, like a room exhaling. But the shift had happened. Richard stayed another 20 minutes. Then he left without saying goodbye. And no one asked where he went, not even the children. The house felt lighter without him. Not empty, lighter. His absence wasn't a wound, it was an opening. Like someone had finally pulled back the heavy curtains, and I could see the room clearly again. The children still asked about him at first. "Is Mr. Richard coming back?" I didn't lie. I didn't explain too much either. "No, baby," I said gently. "He won't be coming by anymore." They were quiet for a moment. Maya blinked up at me. "Did he stop loving us?" "No," I said. "But sometimes grown folks make choices that don't line up with love, and that's not your fault." They nodded. Children don't need all the pieces. They just need to know they're still safe. And they were. I made sure of it. We went back to our rhythm. Not the same as before, but steadier. I cooked breakfast slower, played music in the mornings, let the sunlight in through the windows I'd once kept closed. I bought myself a new robe, a soft, deep blue one that made me feel like I was living in my own body again. And on Sundays, I started sitting in a new pew. Not to avoid Richard. I didn't need to. He'd stopped coming. I sat in that back row with Miss Lorna, who never once said, "I told you so," but always passed me a peppermint during the sermon, like it meant we made it. The garden in the backyard finally got the care it had been waiting on. I planted herbs, repotted the aloe, started a small row of collards with Maya. She loved getting her hands dirty, said the soil felt like cake batter. Jordan helped build a little bench from scraps he found in the shed. We painted it bright yellow. Some days, I just sat on that bench with my tea, listening to the birds, listening to myself. There was a peace in the quiet now. Not the silence I once suffered through, but the kind that comes after you've made it through something without letting it take you under. I didn't miss Richard. Not really. I missed the version of myself I had been when I believed in him. But even that was fading. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Maya tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," she said, You look different now. I raised an eyebrow. How so? You just look free. I smiled, pulled her in close. I guess I am, I said. Miss Lorna stopped by a few nights later, brought pound cake and a new book she thought I'd like. We sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. The sky turned that soft purple you only get at the end of summer, the kind that feels like a blessing. You ever think about dating again? She asked with a little smile. I laughed, not bitter, just honest. I'm not looking, I said, but if peace comes wearing shoes, I won't slam the door. She nodded. We clinked our glasses together as if to say, to this life, this moment, this woman I've become. I don't know what comes next. I'm not chasing anything. I'm not hiding either. I'm here, rooted, reclaimed, and that, at 65, is its own kind of love story. This wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about making someone pay or proving a point. It was about a woman who had already given everything, who chose, finally, to give something back to herself. Evelyn's silence was never weakness. It was wisdom, the kind that comes with years of heartbreak, survival, and grace. She didn't burn the house down. She didn't chase anyone through the streets. She simply stood still long enough for the truth to show its own face. And when it did, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped back into herself, fully. Because love at any age is not about keeping people close out of fear. It's about knowing when to let go without losing yourself in the process. She chose dignity. She chose peace. And in the end, she chose herself. Not as a reaction, but as a return. This was her rebirth. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest, and finally, free.